Oh, I'm so glad that you made it here today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2022 Global FRAND and SEP Symposium. Our opening keynote speaker has made a lot of headlines since she has been appointed to her office by President Joseph Biden in 2022. President Biden appointed Kathy Vidal as Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and Director of the USPTO. As Director of the USPTO, Kathy Vidal is working to expand American innovation for and from all, and to bring more ideas to impact. She also serves as the Vice Chair for the Council of Inclusive Innovation. She will be accompanied by the Associate General Counsel and Chief Patent Counsel at Microsoft, Isabella Fu. Isabella Fu leads the team of attorneys responsible for patent prosecution, counseling, policy, and strategy. We welcome Isabella Fu and Director Vidal to the Symposium's Fireside Chat. I want to thank all of you for this opportunity to host this event, and without any further delay, please welcome Director Kathy Vidal and Isabella Fu.
So I'm really thrilled to have you here today to talk about SEPs. As I'm not sure all of the audience knows, but obviously the Patent Office doesn't deal directly with infringement issues, or licensing issues, which is what a lot of FRAND and SEP controversy is about. But in her role as advisor to the president, she's been doing a ton of listening tours to understand what's going on with global FRAND issues and SEP issues, and has just issued an enormous amount of work and guidance on this. And so I wanted to start with some questions, really going around what you've been hearing as you've been on some of these listening tours. So as an example, one thing that we talk about a lot is like the power of AI and how it's really driven by, in a lot of ways, IoT. Because it's the ability to collect huge amounts of data from disparate areas to help solve things like climate change, global pandemics, and all of that. And I'm wondering, as you've been on your listening tours, a lot of these companies that are utilizing IoT, they're not experts, for example, in things like connectivity and 3GPP. They're just making devices, some of them inexpensive, some of them expensive, that utilize connectivity to collect data and send it back. And so I'm wondering, as you think about them, and a lot of them are smaller companies who can't afford to hire a lot of lawyers, what do you think can be done? Because I think there's a lot of concern that they're going to face some difficulties in SEP licensing. So what have you heard, and what do you think can be done, to help them out here?
So thank you for that question, Isabella. And I wish I could see you all instead.
Yeah, it's bright.
It's very bright. So I will say a couple things. So you're right that there's certain roles that we don't play. And when we decided to withdraw the 2019 policy statement, it was a recognition of that and a recognition that these issues are global and not national. I will say that we do need to make sure we get everybody in the game when it comes to adopting technologies in the US, including these small to medium-sized enterprises. And so where we are right now is we are working across government on this issue. And when I go out and talk to various stakeholders, I'm trying to figure out what their interests are and how the USPTO and then how me and my role in government can play a role in that. So that's really where we're focused. You asked what we're hearing. Some people have antitrust concerns that I've discussed with them. I was recently in Detroit talking to automotive manufacturers, and they want to explore that. People have different thoughts on where are the barriers, how can we create a better system for licensing. Mm-hmm. And I will say, in that regard, we're just at the start of this. So we had a meeting scheduled on the 18th of October that we ended up postponing. We are going to reschedule that. The focus will be a little different, mm-hmm. Because we want to hear from you what we can do to be a catalyst and what I can do in the Biden administration to help U.S. innovation.
Okay. So are there resources right now that you can think of, like especially for some of these smaller entities, that you can think of from the PTO or other places to help them out in figuring out like how they're going to license, how they should think about the landscape and figure out their costs? Again, especially thinking about some of the newer people who are coming into this new.
So I will say that we have a lot of resources. They've not traditionally been focused in that direction. So most of the resources we have for small to medium-sized enterprises and around innovation are more with education and more traditionally within the IP ecosystem and not related to the licensing part. That right now is our biggest challenge is, we're doing a really good job getting out there all over the country, in every corner, trying to bring more people into the innovation ecosystem, and then obviously with the protection and helping them with that and expanding pro bono. But when it actually comes to the bringing to impact, that's where we're going to need to collaborate more with industry and figure out a solution for this. So I would say right now there are not resources in place, but it is an issue that not only the U.S. is dealing with, but other countries are dealing with as well. So for example, I spoke to folks in Singapore recently, including the head of the Singapore office, and they're working on ways to better estimate the value of certain patents. So there's a lot of effort going on internationally around this.
Great. So looking at it from the flip side, there's also a lot of companies that own thousands of standards essential patents and are very experienced with licensing. And I think you've probably heard in your listening tours, they have some concerns about licensing as well. However, there's also a lot of smaller companies that own just a few standards essential patents. And I'm wondering, what you're hearing about, like, are they having issues with licensing, or do they feel like they can get compensated for their innovation?
So I will say that we do hear a lot from small to medium-sized enterprises about the challenges they have. I think they probably need more help and support in that regard. That said, it's not really working for anyone optimally. So that's why, obviously you're going to be talking about a lot of the specifics today. That's why we think this is one area where we need to work across government. We're going to be working with NIST and others across government on this, and we need to start having some roundtables and open listening sessions so we can really solve for this. I will say, Isabella, that when I do talk to companies with all the patents, they have great ideas on how they can help small to medium-sized enterprises. One of them had suggested a tax benefit that, because it's expensive to be involved in standard setting organizations, so they suggested treating it like R&D. So I think there are a lot of great ideas out there, and it's a matter of getting those ideas on the table and figuring out how we can advance them in government.
Yeah. So have you heard, are there any mechanisms you think right now that are working well? I hear you say that maybe there's some challenges, and I think a lot of us agree with that, but are you seeing things that you think right now are working well for these small companies?
So I know that there are some pools that I'm told work quite well. I will say people don't come to me to tell me what's working well. So I mostly hear about the challenges, which is good because that's where we can really make a difference. So I'm sure industry has a better sense of what's working well. The way I look at this, a lot of this comes down to the contract, right? These are really contracts that entities are striking, and certainly some work better than others. But it's as to each individual one that's working well. Like I said, if you're asking what I'm hearing from stakeholders, that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing the opportunities to do better.
That makes sense, of course. Again, nobody wants to tell you you're doing a great job. They want to tell you how you can do better. But so on that side, then, what are you hearing are some of the biggest problems then?
So I think everybody has issues with how the whole enforcement and licensing ecosystem works, and people are trying to fix that. And I will say, often I hear positions that are more binary in the beginning, like people feel like we should go in one direction or the other, and not the patent office, obviously, but government and the courts. And so in terms of what's not working well, I don't think the system is set up right now, except there may be pools that work great. But generally, there's too much litigation around this. It's very expensive. It forecloses some of the small to medium-sized enterprises from actually participating. That's part of the reason why we joined the WIPO MOU on arbitration. Actually, when I signed it, we were the first country to sign it. And when I was signing it, I was told by WIPO that it was my idea, which I had forgotten. They said that I was saying this is an international issue. We need to deal with it internationally. So, so in terms of what works, it'd be great if something like arbitration worked, but both parties have to agree to it. Something like that, as I've suggested, it's always better to agree in advance, because once there is a dispute, it's harder to agree to arbitration than it is if you work it into the standard setting organizations. But overall, it's just such a ripe area where we can fix it. And I will say that's what I'm hearing from stakeholders. From a government point of view, we need more involvement. Like for US competitiveness, for national security, we are comparatively on the sidelines on a lot of this, that we're not as active as other countries. I hear from small to medium-sized enterprises, they're afraid to participate. They think their IP is going to be stolen. So I think if we can come together as a country and think about what would an ideal system look like, and then back that out in terms of what does the government need to do? Does Cantor need to play a role over at antitrust? What role does NIST play? I think there's a lot of opportunity for the country in terms of competitiveness when it comes to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Speaking of it from a global side, in the past few years, there's been attempts by courts outside of the United States, for example, to set global FRAND rates. And while that might seem really efficient in a lot of ways, it seems like in some ways it's an answer. It has, I think it's caused some concern by some of the stakeholders. So I'm thinking first about the Unwired Planet case in the UK, and then in the aftermath of that, there was obviously a lot of litigation in China, and now I hear even Colombia and all over the world where people are trying to get to the forum that they want and to set a global rate there. And then there's a myriad of injunctions, anti-suit injunctions, anti-suit injunctions, with each court trying to stake out what's appropriate between the two parties that are litigating. So do you have concerns about these trends? I mean, again, I think people do want a global solution, but do you have concerns about some of these trends that we're seeing in the course of litigation?
So I do, and I don't consider those global solutions. I think there's a lot of competition, that everybody's trying to advance their own policy by being the chosen forum, and that's dangerous. And what we really need to do is come together on this. I know that I've got trilats coming up in early November with Europe and Japan. We've got IP5 this summer, and obviously we're actively involved in WIPO and WTO. In other areas where there were issues, we struck agreements, we have treaties, we haven't done anything in this space. And right now, there's no real push. I'm not even really seeing a push across countries to do this. I'm seeing more competition than coming together. So I think we need to change the narrative around that, and we need to talk about how we can work together across our countries to make sure that these systems work for everyone.
Yeah, that's great. Are you hearing from state? I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned treaties. I think I haven't heard that much about that. Are you hearing from stakeholders, for example, that that's a solution that we should, I can't necessarily be between the patent offices, but working through WIPO and that kind of thing? Are you hearing a lot of clamor for treaties?
I'm not.
No.
It's just something, as I think about this from a bigger picture perspective and think about how we solve other international issues that probably started in the same way, that's often where we end up, is some agreements as to how things are going to be handled. So stakeholders are not addressing that. Some do have proposed legislation that they're addressing, that they'd like to push forward. I think that was a nominal topic that was on the list for our discussion on the 18th of October that we moved off, but we're really going to focus on how do we come together and what are the right mechanisms. If there's things we can do to help assist Congress, that's great. We probably won't have a session where we're talking about legislation in particular, but would love to better understand how we can all solve this together so that everybody in the ecosystem in the US is a part of that. I know we're very aligned with Europe on a lot of this, and just want to make sure that we're coming together. And as I said, when I do have the stakeholder meetings, and we get off the initial, position, which is often, like I said, binary, people have a lot of great ideas. I mean, those who are in these industries, who participate in the organizations, I've only participated in one in terms of setting IP policy. So I'm not as familiar with every single one of them, obviously, but I think hearing from people on the ground as to what more we can do, what kind of behavior we want to incentivize, and then I'm happy to play a role in any way, whether it's the USPTO as a catalyst, whether it's me talking to other areas of government, whatever we can do to optimize this system for the US, for the future, for innovation, for national security. This is one of my top priorities. I think this AI, there's some areas that are really across government issues that are critical to the country.
Yeah, that's great. And so, it sounds like you've heard from stakeholders that there is some fear about even participating in a standards organization. How do you think that's affecting U.S. innovation in general?
There's some,
So it sounds like there's some concern from some stakeholders that they're concerned about even participating in the standards process. And so how do you think that affects U.S. innovation?
So, you know, to me, it's not only innovation, it's how do we create the jobs, how do we keep the manufacturing in the U.S., it's all of that. And in order for that system to be optimized for the good of the country, it's important that people not fear that their IP is going to be stolen. It's important that U.S. patents and U.S. standards get embroiled into these standards organizations. The biggest, I wouldn't say fear because I don't really focus on fears, but the worst case scenario is we play less of a role in these and other countries are the ones driving the standards, and then it's more difficult for us to implement them. The products get made overseas. I mean, we've seen some of this happen in 5G where it can create a lot of issues. So the more we can have U.S. involvement, and not to the exclusion of others, but we need at least fair representation to make sure that we've got a stable network of standards that we can all adopt and create jobs and make products.
Yeah. And so you also mentioned that you are hearing from some stakeholders, some mechanisms that would help. Like, just curious, like what are some of those that you've heard and that you think should be explored more?
So I want to be a little bit sensitive because some of the solutions that I hear are very one-sided, and I don't want there to be some thought that we're exploring an extreme solution that's going to help one stakeholder versus another. I will say that compared to a lot of the other things that we're doing where I have a lot more data and I've been studying it for 6 months and I've been hearing from stakeholders for 6 months, we aren't hearing enough in this area. So it wasn't until about a month ago that I turned to our team and said, we need to start driving people into us because they're not coming to us and talking about these issues, that they're talking about all the other things on their mind with regard to IP. So the discussions are not representative at this point. You know, I did go to Detroit just to have a discussion with the automotive industry, and we were going to do the event on the 18th. There were other events too that were conflicting with that. And I am working with NIST, and as you'll hear soon, even more across government on these issues. So it's too early, from my point of view, for me to be able to say what I'm hearing and make that be representative of what the country is communicating right now.
Okay. So you did, though, recently announce that the USPTO is going to partner with WIPO on its arbitration program. I think arbitration can be great in a lot of instances, but as you mentioned, parties have to agree, and right now, you know, it seems that there's more agreement among some companies, but maybe not among others. I mean, some of the concerns I think about arbitration are things like, you know, it's still expensive. You know, I think the courts like it because it gets it out of the courts, and you can set a global rate, but it's still, you know, it's still quite expensive. It also is, you know, very time-consuming, and it's not necessarily shorter or cheaper than litigation. Another concern is that it's still bilateral in that it only solves problems between two parties, you know, one patent holder and one manufacturer. And then the other issue is that it's not completely transparent because, you know, the proceedings are confidential, rightfully so, because that's what the parties are asking for. So it's not a problem necessarily with the system, but, you know, the parties are, you know, entitled to confidentiality. And so in that sense, it doesn't necessarily, you know, unlike a court case, allow parties to see what happened and then, you know, extrapolate from there and maybe solve their own issues with that. So with all of that, I mean, I know you've said that you're looking, you know, folks are looking at ways to improve that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can kind of improve some of those mechanisms to make it a more popular option?
So, you know, Isabella, you bring up a lot of really good issues. So first of all, I think we need to not just adopt a past model. So arbitration as it's normally conceived, you're right, is bilateral. It has all of the issues that you recognize, but that doesn't mean we can't reshape it. That doesn't mean we can't make sure that there's some way to make public all of the different rates. Now, how we get there is not clear, but I think we need to rethink the system. And as I said, we're in the infancy in terms of trying to work with stakeholders because this is something we solve together. This is not something that that we can do without understanding ideas on how do we make sure rates are well known. Litigation, I don't think, is a great surrogate because there's all kinds of additional taxes there that if it was an efficient system, the prices would be lower, but they would be something that everybody would agree to in the beginning. So how we get there, to me, is unclear. And I will say signing the WIPO MOU was not a be-all, end-all. It was this is international, let's move the dialogue to the international level and think through these issues. WIPO is also working on a number of other thoughts around this and talking to stakeholders about this and talking bilaterally to countries about this. So where we end up is all going to be a matter of what we create together. Yeah. And I will say there are proposed bills that have, I don't know if any of them are public, but for any issue that you could address, I've seen stakeholders with proposed bills that might be able to help in that regard. And again, I think it's got to work for everyone for this to really work for the country.
That's great. So, we've all observed, as you've it seems like you've been in this position for years, but it actually, given the amount of work, but it actually hasn't been that long. And so we've all observed you've had a huge passion around getting out and talking to all kinds of innovators or potential innovators, whether they be large companies, small companies, and even like students and kids. I'm especially grateful that you came out to a high school in Southern California. It was a high school that, for the audience, I should paint the picture a little bit. It's a high school that has, over 90% kids qualifying for free lunch, 90%, over 90% Latinx, and a lot of first generation, people who've come to this country very recently. And through, even though a lot of these students didn't have a lot of means, through charitable grants and pro bono work, they were able to obtain a patent on monitoring health of diabetic patients. And so you came out on a weekend, on a Saturday in September, to talk to these kids. And so can you tell me why it is you're so passionate and so concerned about reaching these folks?
Well, and I appreciate that, and it's, I feel like my job is very layered in terms of what I'm dealing with, and some is more very technical and law intensive. So the way I look at it is, every day that I wake up, I want to do as much as I can to move the country forward. And some of that is work that we need to do now that is going to impact now. And some of that is making sure that we're laying the groundwork for the future. So when I think about the kids, I think about, where would we be today if we had done this 20 years ago? How many more people would be invested in the ecosystem? Would the number still be 13% for a number of women on patents, and even more abysmal for other groups, although we can't quite monitor that data yet. And so as I think about it, I think we've been a country that was built on innovation. We're the country of startups. It's really done a lot for our country, and we need to make sure that we're still positioned to do that. And other countries have recognized that. Other countries are mimicking our models. They're even, some of the ones that mimicked the model of copying IP are now thinking, oh, the US system is working around having strong IP. Now we're going to change our policies. So we need to stay ahead of that to make sure the US stays competitive. And the only way to do that is really getting out there, teaching IP early and often, teaching innovation, and then making sure that people recognize it, they get excited about that, and then they start innovating. And when they do that, and if we can bring them to impact, thanks to Microsoft's program and the Lemelson Foundation for the visit that I made, if we can bring them to impact, we're going to solve more world problems, because a lot of these innovators that are not traditional are focused on empathetic invention, so that's very important. And then B, we'll create more jobs. I mean, the data is there that if we can quadruple the number of patents, we can increase GDP by $1 trillion. So if you think about your neighbors that may not have jobs, I mean, it makes a big difference for the country. So that program is great. Last year, we taught 250,000 children through Camp Invention, and by the end of a week, these kids are asking questions that you would normally hear, at college level. They're asking, how can I protect my merch on the internet? And how much is a patent going to cost me? These are 9-year-olds. It's what was it? The kids say the darndest thing. This is the opposite. By the end of the week, they're so educated and enthusiastic. And I will say, it trickles down into the whole ecosystem. So it's actually rejuvenated the teachers. So what we've heard is that the first year it was hard to get teachers for the program. Now they're clamoring to get in because they say the kids don't even want to touch their phone. They're so excited about building a flip-flop, or they built a little aquarium that had electricity. I mean, they're creating these things that they get so excited about. So if that's why I think it's important to get out there. And I mean, I could talk about this forever, as you can tell. And not only with the kids, but as you mentioned, with the individual inventors, with making sure we're hearing people's struggles, what works for them, how we can be a catalyst for that, and we're working on programs around that. So just for example, we have some data that women often, even if we can get them to patent, they are more likely, if they receive a rejection notice, to not move forward. So I mean, that's something we can solve for. We can put a nice cover letter around the rejection notice explaining what that means, that we're not rejecting, that's the technical term, but it means that we're inviting a dialogue to figure out what you have here that may be patent eligible, and then we can show, we can send them off to some videos so they can learn more about it. So to me, I would never have all these ideas if I didn't hear them from the people who are identifying the ways that we can do better.
Yeah. I mean, I will say for our program, it's been, we have a program where we file patents for generally students and generally underprivileged students, and seeing them with their teachers and seeing them get a patent. I mean, literally the one that you went to, every single time we get a patent, all the principals, the mayor, they all want to show up and celebrate this. And a lot of these kids go on and they study STEM in college, and you really can feel like you can make a difference just by doing a little bit of pro bono work on patents. And it's not something I would have necessarily thought of, but it's been incredibly gratifying for me, and I hope you've seen how we're trying to make a difference.
It makes a huge difference. I mean, these are kids that were breadboarding.
Yeah.
And they were, the inventors, 6 of them were women, each from a different country, and all first-generation Americans. I mean, it's incredible. And most all of them were going off into STEM education. And they had tears in their eyes. I mean, it was so touching when they were, they already knew they got the patent, but just the celebration was so meaningful and touching, and really it changes their careers, it changes the community, the path of the community, and it creates more for everyone.
Yeah. So getting back to that as well, in terms of getting people involved and all that, what do you think? Well, first of all, turning back to SEPs, I hear it sounds like you've got a lot of events planned. What would you recommend, we all do in order to, get our ideas to you, have more dialogue, have some, working together from all points of view to work on mechanisms that'll work for everybody? What would be your recommendations to how we can all get involved in that?
So I appreciate that. Specific to SEPs, we do have a group internally that is working on SEPs. That's what they do all the time. And I will say that hearing from you how we can be a catalyst, hearing from you when we reset that meeting, what are the things we can discuss together? What are your ideas on the role the USPTO could play? What are your ideas on the role the U.S. government can play? Because I can be your advocate, within the U.S. government on the role we can play. So right now, when we go forward, we are going to ask for some written statements. Right now, you can go to the Engage the Director website. Mm-hmm. I just cleared my email again last night on that, so I look at all the things that come in on that. And then we direct it in whatever direction. So if it's something on SEP, I'll send it to the SEP. I'll read it, I'll send it to the SEP team, and we'll use that to shape the role of the USPTO to help all of you going forward, to help your clients going forward. So I would encourage you that the more, and as you know, the more specific ideas you have, and I say this because Isabella came in a stakeholder meeting, and I said, the more specific you can get about what we can do, the better. And then one of her comments made it into the request for comment that came out recently, because she was very specific, and it was a great idea. So I would say the more specific you can be about what role we can play and what you want to see and how that's going to work for everyone, the better. And any ideas, whether it's procedural, substantive, et cetera, open to hearing it. This is really important. I will share it with NIST. We will work on this together.
Yeah, it's great that you said that, because I always feel like people want to talk about things in generalities, but my tendency has always been to try to actually draft and give a red line and that sort of thing. So it's really gratifying to see that, that you appreciate that you're actually looking at all of those details. So, to the rest of the audience, I would also say that's true. At least what I found is if you do more of the work, you'll be heard
Well, and then you're part of the solution.
Yeah.
Right, so be part of the solution, because we can then be a catalyst for that and can push it forward.
Yeah, and can you speak to, I don't know if you can speak to any other events that you're doing specifically. I know you canceled the moving the October 18th one. Are there other ones that, also looking at it from a global perspective, that you think that the audience can participate in as well?
So I would say stay tuned on what's going on with WIPO. Some of that we're doing directly, some of that we're not, but I think that's important work that's happening there. And then beyond that, we don't have anything planned. We are going to reschedule that one. I think what you're going to see going forward is more of an all-of-government approach. So each part of government we're focused on this. This is really important. And the next step is really for us to come together and then chart this path forward together. So the next path when it comes to meetings, et cetera, it's not just going to be the USPTO.
Okay, that's great. That's great to hear. And then lastly, just turning back to the more general ecosystem and some of the things we talked about in terms of getting more innovation and other people participating. Is there anything that you want to say to the group as a whole, all of us gathered here, about like what we can do and what we what would help out the entire system, not just in the standards area?
So I think there's so many areas where you can get involved. So certainly, if you connect up with us around something you have interest in, we'll see how we can collaborate on it. But if you think about it, just even pro bono, if you're in an organization, I know most organizations have some form of pro bono. Why don't we push it to the front end of how do we get into communities, incentivize them to innovate, help them patent, as opposed to waiting for the back end when they haven't done that and now they need more help with housing and other things. Like, it'll be better for the country if we can focus a lot of our pro bono efforts more proactively on how to help people not get to the place where they need additional need, and how to help the country as a whole. So I would encourage you, you can go to, I think you can email probono@uspto.gov. We have a pro bono website. Anything we can do to expand that, it is shown to have one of the biggest impacts. I will say, even on the data, whereas we have 13% of women patenting, so 13% of patentees are women, when we reach people where they are through pro bono, it's 41%, which is a huge difference. And what it means is there are people out there that just need your support. They just need to understand the system and connect into it. And only by getting your help can they then create jobs, market their product, make sure that it's not stolen by other countries. To me, pro bono is critically important. I'll just give you a few other stats on that. Like I said, we can't yet track stats across demographics, but in terms of the other statistics, 30% of those who reach out to us to benefit from pro bono are African American, 14% are Hispanic, 5.6% are Asian American, and 1.5% are Native American. So if you think that is not taking away patenting from those people who don't identify in those groups, it's expanding it into those groups who didn't otherwise have the access. So I would say pro bono, and then if you look at our website, there's the LEAP program, like the next generation of PTAB practitioners. There's pro bono for trademarks. I mean, we have that through the law schools. That's really important as well. So anywhere where you can think about not just you getting involved, but how can you orient your organization around one of these efforts that's going to have the most impact for the country, I would just please do that. And then if you have a problem connecting, engage the director goes right into my inbox. So I'm happy to answer questions directly or hook you into somebody in the USPTO who can help you figure out how to scale what you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. I will say, if you're asking what we can do, I mean, I've been so impressed at how open the office has been to suggestions, like even anybody's suggestions. And so, I would say also, when we look at the data, I think one of the things that's really difficult about diversity is actually sort of getting a lot of this data. And so we've done some work around some of that, and just in terms of like figuring out, like, I know you've put out a lot of reports about, what percentage of, companies, what percentage of their inventors are diverse, what percent are women, and that kind of thing. And so we've drilled on that a lot more, and have a lot of ideas to share about like how we can get a little bit more granular on that data and really see what's working and what's not working, because that's really the key. And so from your perspective, like are there a couple things that you think can really help companies with this in terms of their diversity? Have you seen actually work?
So I will say, I know a number of organizations are trying to aggregate that information, which I think is phenomenal. I will say our Council for Inclusive Innovation, we're going to ramp that up and take that in a whole expanded direction. So I've now brought in other areas of government into it, including MBDA, EDA, the Copyright Office, NIST, and what we're going to do next is really think about how to scale all that we're doing and bring everybody into it. So the first thing I recognize is the Council for Inclusive Innovation has 31 members. It's like, and everybody comes in and says, how can I participate? And I thought, well, we're not very inclusive if we're not allowing everybody who wants to be part of it to be able to participate and to work with us. So the next round is really going to be, we're meeting at the end of November with folks in CI Squared and really thinking about how can we bring all of these efforts in, because the more we work together on these, the more we identify best practices. I have my own ideas. I'd like to do a video with companies that's like the unconscious bias video. I'd love to produce a video on inclusive innovation and ask companies to show that video just like they do unconscious bias, so that when people think about who to bring into the lab, when they think about how to collaborate, when they think about who to list on a patent, they're thinking inclusively. I ran it by a couple CEOs of major Fortune 100 companies. They said, if I don't have to do anything to create the video, we will show it. So, but that's just one. I mean, that's just one idea. I think there's so many great ideas out there, and getting everyone together through meetings and otherwise, I think we're going to make a lot of progress.
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful that we will as well.
We will.
So I think it looks like we're just about out of time. So thank you so much. I always learn a lot from hearing you speak, and I'm, again, so thankful that you're willing to listen to everybody's input.
Well, I appreciate it. I look forward to the readout from all of this, because I know there's going to be a lot of great discussion, a lot of great speakers, and really appreciate that everybody is focused on this issue, because it is one of the few issues that's really going to dictate U.S. competitiveness.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we close the 2022 Global FRAND and SEP Symposium, I just want to acknowledge some people who helped make this possible for all of us. I can't read all the names, but you'll recognize the faces. It's been wonderful to see old friends and meet new friends. Another acknowledgement is to our platinum sponsor, McCool Smith, who, like all our sponsors, helped to make this event possible. I'd like to thank Cater2, our caterer, and FN Tech, who did a wonderful job producing this event. Thank you to all of them. And of course, thank you to the Executive Director of Bauz IP Law, who put in an enormous amount of time to make this such a fabulous event. Thank you, Maria, for your help. And now the Computer History Museum has done a wonderful job as well, and they're leaving 25,000 square feet of their museum open for us during the networking reception. So thank you to the Computer History Museum as well, and we look forward to seeing you downstairs where there will be not so small plates to enjoy. And thank you for those remote participants as well who joined us from 3 continents, as well as our speakers and moderators who also joined us from 3 continents. Thank you very much. Enjoy.